Florida-friendly landscaping class that we have today on this kind of gloomy Wednesday morning, but I guess it can't be all sunshine all the time. We need the rain as well. We're going to start with a great program today called Diverse Lawn Areas and talk about how to break away from monotonous monocultures. And we won't talk exclusively about lawn areas. We're also going to talk about bedding areas. I have my guest, Frank Galdo, who is the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program Coordinator, correct? Or agent?
Yep,
and
program coordinator.
Program coordinator. You do have the exact same title I do. In our county to the south, in Pasco County. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you. Glad to be here today.
And I'm going to talk, I'm going to start, and I'm going to talk about those of us who are not in deed restricted communities with HOAs that are very particular about how your lawn looks. But you may still be fairly particular, but I'm going to talk about things we can do in our yards to bring more of those pollinators in and to stress less. We always like that. I am Lilly Browning. I work for Hernando County Utilities. Frank works for Pasco County Extension. FFL people kind of are, fluid where we work. I work under water conservation, which I think is a perfect fit here in Hernando County. If you'd like a PDF copy of my program or Frank's program when he starts, email me after this program at LillyB, LILLYB, at hernandocounty.us. That's a hint to you, Frank, to send me your PDF when we're done so I can send it out to anyone who wants it. This is the program that Frank and I both teach here. He teaches it in Pasco. I teach it in Hernando, Florida Friendly Landscaping program that was created by the University of Florida around about at 95, 97, somewhere in there. Kind of Florida's answer to xeriscaping, because they sat down and thought xeriscaping doesn't work for Florida. We're not all rock and cactus, but we want to bring you something that works with our environment and that saves water and that is good for the environment. So everything either one of us do, we are teaching one or more of these 9 principles. And we're going to cover a whole bunch of them today: right plant, right place, watering efficiently, fertilizing, all of these things I think we're going to touch on. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about lawns. Okay, I'm going to shrink down the waiting room if you can keep an eye on it, Frank. Okay, just so it's not in my way. Why do we have lawns? Sometimes I drive around town and I, in the middle of the day, if I have work errands or something, and I'm looking around and you see lots of busy people. You either see homeowners themselves or even whole lots of businesses flittering around, and it's all based around our lawn. And I have even thought before, if archaeologists look at us, in 5,000 years or something, what conclusion are they going to come to? Like, well, they had this plant that they liked, to keep, at their houses, and they grew it, but they didn't eat it and they didn't utilize it for anything. They harvested it and then they threw it away. But they spent enormous amounts of time and energy and money. I don't know, did they worship it? What was its purpose? So that got me kind of thinking about lawns in general. And if we think way back to Europe, in the Middle Ages, nobody had lawns except maybe the lords of the manor. And they had natural meadows, in Europe, so that made it easier. But they had expanses of lawns, think of, Versailles and all that. And what they were basically saying is, I'm so rich. I have land I don't have to use. It doesn't have to do anything but be pretty. So that was a status symbol. And even after, people came to America, they also used every inch of land that they got a hold of for something productive, even if they were just, they didn't own the land, they were serfs or something. Every little piece of ground, that they happened to live on, there was a house, there was a stable right there, and then they grew what they could on whatever land that they had. So once things, started getting, all of America, started becoming a little more prosperous, things changed a bit. So then people had lawns, and a lot of people like to blame Better Homes and Gardens. I don't know if they are, in the late 1800s, if they are exclusively to blame or not, but they were kind of pushing the ideal along with the invention of the reel mower and garden hoses that, it's kind of, you're a good citizen, an all-American person, or if you have this very neat, nice looking lawn. And that's how it got into all of our psyches. There's other psychological things going on, kind of, which I talk about in another class. It has to do with, going way back to being on a savanna and wanting to see everything around you and have that flat surface to feel safe. But basically we have lawns because everybody else has lawns. And Florida-friendly landscaping is not anti-lawn. That might be a point of frustration for some people who just want to say, just get rid of lawns. Well, Florida-friendly landscaping, remember that first principle? Right plant, right place. There are times and situations where a lawn is the right plant in the right place. Even St. Augustine Floratam lawns can be the right plant in the right place. The question you need to ask is, are you pouring so many different resources to keep this plant alive? Then it's not the right plant in the right place. But what are the benefits of turf grass? We like it, we're used to seeing it. It may not really raise property value, but it will help with curb appeal for sure. It does reduce stormwater runoff. It reduces erosion. That's why they plant it on the sides of the road. It's a plant, it produces oxygen. So it cools and cleans the air. You would rather stand on a lawn than, on a sidewalk or in a parking lot in the middle of a hot day. You just know it cools things down. It reduces glare, so it's not like just cement, pouring into your windows of your house. This is the catch-22. It does reduce noise, but the equipment that you use to maintain it adds to noise pollution. So you kind of, it's kind of a little of both. And in some areas, it's just the practical choice. The most reasonable thing to put in some areas. But every lawn that we have here in Florida, it's going to need 6 to 8 hours of sun every day in order to be a healthy stand of lawn. If you can't provide that, or that doesn't exist in those conditions, you're going to be very hard pressed to have a nice looking lawn for very long. The different types of lawns that are usually available here in Hernando County are going to be 2 types of lawns, Bahia grass and St. Augustine. Floratam is a variety of St. Augustine. There's maybe 8 varieties of St. Augustine. Floratam is one of them. It is the most commonly used in the sod industry here in Central Florida. It was created in a lab, developed in 1973 by a combination group effort between the University of Florida and Texas A&M, Floratam, there comes its name. Bahia grass has been with us since about 1914 or so. It's also a different variety of it is used as pasture grass. There is not really any turf out there that is a Florida native turf. Florida is not known for having meadows. So you got to consider that as well, that you're dealing with a non-native plant and sometimes trying to make it work in maybe inhospitable conditions. And each turf grass has at least one major pest problem that could limit its use in certain locations, or, that it doesn't do well in shade, or there might be other aspects. So I do have also a class on everything you wanted to know about lawns. So you could watch that one as well on Hernando County Government YouTube. But I took this from there. We're just going to take parts of it because I am assuming if you're watching this, you are interested in the low maintenance end of things. In that other class, I tell you what you're going to get out of low maintenance, out of medium maintenance, out of high maintenance with the different types of lawns. But let's just say for this class, you're interested in not a lot of input. So what do you want? What do you want? That's what we need to think about. What do we want our lawn to do? What do we want to accomplish? Maybe, do you want just a simple, easy lawn? You mow it and go. Do you want to be able to walk or play? Play in it, have someone play in it, or be able to walk barefoot in it. You want to walk barefoot in it, really, the turf is really about the only plant I can think of that's going to really allow you to do that. You want an area just for your dog to run around and, do its thing. If you want those three things, I would stick with a low maintenance turf. The most low maintenance turf that we have available would be that Bahia grass. Okay. As I said, I'm assuming here that you're looking for low maintenance. So say that you want low, you want mowing only. This is what's going to happen if you choose Floritam grass, but all you want to do is mow it. You're going to need a naturally moist area. If you don't have that, then Floritam is not your choice for a low maintenance lawn. Basically, hardly anyone ever walking on it or doing anything, or the dog running or anything. If you want a low maintenance Floritam, you must mow it at 4 inches or higher. That is for the health of the lawn. No matter, 4 inches or higher is on every one of those levels. That just has to happen. You have to tolerate weeds. If you want St. Augustine, Floritam, and have low maintenance, you have to tolerate some weeds. Water it during the dry times, 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, and don't bag the grass clippings. And you do need also sun, 6 to 8 hours. Now, say you want to do low maintenance, so let's look at Bahia grass. Again, Bahia absolutely needs the sun, even more than the Floritam does. You have to mow it high, 4 inches or higher. You can let it go to seed, let those seed heads, some people don't like those seed heads, that's the problem for them. But there's some viable seeds on those. So every so often let them go to seed, or you can go and get a bag of Bahia grass every 3 or 4 years, Bahia grass seed, spread it around. It's really expensive right now, really expensive. So you might want to stick with, the seed heads. I just got a 10-pound bag. It's like $70. So yeah, it's kind of really expensive right now. Bahia doesn't tolerate a whole lot of traffic either. And don't brag those grass clippings on any of the lawns. And again, you want low maintenance, you got to tolerate some weeds. Here's the results, in the summer, probably, when you've had a lot of good rain. of a low maintenance Bahia grass, or here's what it could look like. It's a good green ground cover. And as master gardener volunteers like to say here in Hernando, if it's green, mowable, and looks good at 30 miles an hour, it's good for me. You noticed none of these, because we're talking about low maintenance, none of these have really included any real sort of fertilizing, weeding, anything like that, because we want simple. And it is possible if you mow high enough and give it the proper amount of water. The hay grass, I did not add any watering. It can live on natural rainfall. It'll go brown, it'll go dormant, but it'll come right back when the rain starts coming back. So, basically, if you stop doing a whole bunch of stuff to it, it'll probably, if it's the right plant in the right place, look pretty good. Here's another results of low maintenance and weeds that don't bother me. This is my backyard, this one on the right. We put in these pavers. I say we so liberally. My son-in-law put in these pavers, and then I did nothing. He just put them in, and I did nothing. You see how nice this little low-growing grass is filled in around the pavers? It's crabgrass. Do I care? No, looks good. And crabgrass you can mow kind of low. It's the other grass is gone from that area from when we pull in. So that's what naturally covered that area. I'm not particular. It's green and it looks nice. Now this, you can see some holes and stuff here. This is my front lawn. But what I want to show you is this is where my property stops. But we bought this lot. And my husband has begun clearing it out. Now, when they dug this little swale, all that dirt was just kind of piled right there for years. We had stuff growing on it. So again, that handy son-in-law, we had him come with his bobcat and smooth it out because there were ruts and stuff there. So what was there in April, May, was just the bare sand and dirt that he smoothed out around there. I didn't put any grass seed there. I didn't plant anything there. Look at that, it's blending in with my front lawn. See, in Florida, things are gonna grow. Is it gonna look that good in the winter? No, those are probably summer weeds, but it, just gave it sunlight and some type of green mowable ground cover. Growing very nicely there. So here's some other things. That was that first order of people that just wants a flat ground cover. I go out and mow it. That's it. Okay, here's another group of people. What do you want your lawn to do? Maybe you want to attract pollinators and provide that diversity in your lawn, in your yard, while having a lawn that you can mow or walk or play in. So with that, I would say mow it and grow it. Let those weeds pop through. We have two names. I didn't make up either of them. A freedom lawn. You are free from worrying about how many weeds and things are in your lawn, and free from all that maintenance. But also we call them diverse lawn areas because it's actually being proven at the university that having some weeds is actually good for that turf grass, because as the title of this program mentions, how to avoid monotonous monocultures. A monoculture is an expanse of the same plant just everywhere. When we have a monoculture, what happens if that particular plant has an insect that favors that plant, or has a disease that favors that plant? Take all root rot is a disease that favors St. Augustine lawns. So what happens if there's only that plant and that problem comes around? Well, of course, it looks like a major disaster. But if you have diversity, and I always say this, diversity is the key to any healthy ecosystem. It's good for your turf to have some different kind of little plants growing in there. This I took a picture of. It is in my neighbor's yard. My neighbor's yard looks a lot different than mine. You can see he has St. Augustine, and he wants to put a lot more inputs and resources in his lawn than I do. Well, over the winter last year, he spread some ryegrass around. Nothing wrong with doing that. If you want just some winter green, look in your yard, it's going to be gone by May. But knowing that, he spread that around, and I was outside looking, and I was on the ground taking pictures. They kind of faded out in the photo, but that's blue-eyed grass. I was so excited that he had blue-eyed grass last spring in his lawn, and I'm down there taking pictures, and he comes out and starts complaining, yeah, they put those weeds in that ryegrass. He's used to me just crawling around his yard and taking different pictures and things. But his complaint was my joy. So you can tell, a little bit of differences there too. I wouldn't mind any of this, dichondra, there's some oxalis, any of those things, bring it on as far as I'm concerned. So when we're talking about weeds, what is a weed? What is the definition of a weed? And let me make clear here, this is not a particular class about invasive weeds, because that's a different subject. An invasive weed is usually a non-native that just takes over everything and becomes that monoculture to the detriment of the other plants around. That's not what we're referring to here. We're referring to either a native plant or a non-aggressive, we call them well-behaved non-native plant. So with that in mind, what is a weed? It's simply a plant growing where a human doesn't want it to grow. This particular weed here is one of, Frank and I both, I think, have a love-hate relationship with this Spanish needle. You were just asking questions about this on one of the Facebook groups.
Yeah, I definitely would classify my relationship with this plant as love-hate.
Yes, exactly.
There is no amount of good intentions, and I will stay on top of this plant that will keep it in check. It is beneficial for pollinators and has good, good things about it, but you cannot control it. No matter how well you think you cannot.
Winter helps.
Winter helps.
Winter helps, yes. And I have the same thing. It starts growing out of control in my front bed. But then I'm out there and, hundreds of pollinators all over it. Can't bring myself to get rid of it. So,
that's my struggle too, is, I find that I either need to get it before it blooms, or else I have to sit there and remind myself that I have so much other stuff blooming in the yard right now that the pollinators are going to be able to adjust and adapt, and I'll chop it back in chunks. They can move along and whatnot, but yeah, I'm too kind-hearted. I see a bee on it and I'm like, oh.
Yeah, exactly.
And
yes.
Next thing I know, it's like, haha, and it's taken over another 6 feet of the backyard.
Yep. Yep. But that's our love-hate relationship. But here it is with Spanish needle. And as we said, it does attract anything, you name it. And it's a photographer's dream. If you want to go out and get a picture of an insect on a flower, keep some Spanish needle, it'll be there. And they say it is the 3rd most reliable source of nectar for pollinators in the state. So, and it is certainly, as we mentioned, not neat and tidy, but it will freeze and it will come back. So when it freezes is a good time to kind of clear out that area, but it'll come back. Mine took slower to come back this year. I must have done a pretty good job of clearing it out, or it was that rainless May that I keep talking about too. I don't know, it says here it's edible to humans. I assume that's just the flowers. Do you know about that, Frank?
I tend not to get too much into edibility because I don't want to conflate, my personal readings and stuff with UF recommendations and whatnot. But I do know the leaves also have some edible qualities that people that are into that kind of stuff make use of in various ways, cooked or like little bits in salads and whatnot. My rabbits and the wild rabbits in our backyard that sometimes live there absolutely love the leaves as well, of the tender new growth on there. So.
Now this is the plant that will put those little stickers, those hitchhikers all over you. So probably not a good place where you walk a lot or where your pets run and play. Not a good place to have those. Here's one that's growing right now. Portulaca, purslane, primrose, whatever you want to call it. Really cute, tiny little weed, we want to call it that. It's very drought tolerant. It's like a succulent. If you get down there, really look at it, it kind of just goes along the ground. So if you see these little tiny pink or purple-ish flowers, get down and look at them. They do close by midday. That's why it says kiss me quick. I have never bent down and kissed one of these. Oh, moss rose is another name of it, but that's just its name. They say, I haven't tried it, maybe that's something I'm going to try, to pick it up and transplant it in places for a great ground cover. And it does attract grass skippers. See, the great thing about having these quote, quote, weeds in your lawn is you're going to attract all those pollinators, and you're going to have a living yard instead of just, a big sterile square. This is one of our favorites. One of the favorite things, my favorite thing about this is that it attracts these three butterflies, the white peacock, Phaon crescent, and the buckeye. The Phaon crescent and the buckeye are like quarter size. They're so cute. My second favorite thing about this is it's free. I did not put it in my lawn or even in my beds, but it's there and certainly doesn't bother me. And you can mow it, in with your grass, and it'll be perfectly happy. It comes with several names. You could call it basically anything you want. You can call it Irving if you want it, apparently, but it is turkey, tango, Frogfruit. That's one of my favorite names. Turkey, tango, Frogfruit, or just Frogfruit, or Fogfruit for short, or totally different, a matchhead weed. And if you look at it, that probably makes the most sense. It looks, a lot like a matchhead. This grows naturally. I believe you can get it if you wanted it at native plant centers, or you can just go anywhere, where you happen to find it, start it somewhere in a patch in your yard. It'll probably happily move along and take over. But to me, it's so nice to sit in the middle of my yard and watch all these butterflies flitting around than just be there, in grass where nothing is happening except it's growing and I have to mow it again. So this is going to be making its presence known right about now. Purple lovegrass. This also grows naturally where I live in northwestern Hernando County. It's going to have this purpley hue soon, in the next week or two. If you drive along the roadsides, especially up in the northwestern Hernando, you may have it in other places near you. Look at the sides of the roads, you'll see just swaths of this misty light purple look. That is from this purple lovegrass. It grows, the back half of my yard was left natural, plus now I have that other lot. So it grows there, and I have transplanted it, because you can have it look like a formal border or something. The only thing is that you might not like about it is, as misty and pretty as this inflorescence looks, it is on a stalk. And those will turn kind of hay colored and break off and blow around and be at your front door and, you know, all of that. But I think it's, you know, very attractive yard plant. And the Zebulon skipper is its host. It's a host to the Zebulon skipper. It also attracts other butterflies and birds. I believe that should say deer don't like it. Doors don't mind it at all. Doors seem to attract it when it breaks off there. The deer leave it alone though, if you have a problem with that. And, you know, planted in mass or where it happens to grow in mass, looks great this time of year.
See, I thought you were making a reference to the wispy seed heads like blowing off and getting caught in your screen or something. I'd heard that sort of thing about saltbush. I'd heard it once said that saltbush looks really nice until you plant it next to a screen. And then all those little feathery tufts get caught in it.
Yeah, oh, I bet.
You won't like it as much.
Yes.
But here makes sense too.
Here is one that you're going to look at me and say, okay, all right, now you're just messing with me. This is just a weed. I know it's a weed, but let's, you know, redefine what do we mean by weed. This is a sage. It's in the mint family. If you feel it, it has a square stem. This flowers in the late winter. You can see it coming up really before a lot of other things do. And I'm sure you've overlooked it, just saying in your mind you're a weed. But look at it. It's, you know, it's a beautiful plant and it attracts mainly bees. You know, we're here to save the bees. This is one way to do it. Let this lyre leaf sage, see its leaves are shaped like the musical instrument, lyres. So, you know, let those be for the bees. Here's another, this wildflower is endemic to Florida. What does that mean? It means it only grows here. Florida green eyes. I have plenty of these popping up in my yard. They're not all that hoppy, like in a thick turf. You won't see them popping up out of there. But if you have an area that is a little more sparse, they do come up there quite often. Where they want to grow is where they grow. And they will attract bees and wasps and flies and butterflies and birds. What a great thing to have around. This one, now, you have to be careful, you know, with this. Ranchers, of course, don't like it. You can see why. That would be dangerous to their livestock. It's the only widespread eastern cactus. So many things love to eat this. And it's amazing to me when cactus put out the most, you know, fragile looking, gentle flowers. It's really, you know, cool. But gopher tortoises, I have several gopher tortoises, just incorporated more in my family when I bought a lot next to me. They love to eat this. They'll eat it right up, as well as many other quail, which I just saw maybe 6 weeks ago. I was lounging in my pool, thought out of the corner of my eye for a second, my mind told me robin, but then I really looked at it and I thought, that's a huge robin. And it was a bobwhite quail, mother, father, and about 7 babies in the evening, just walking through my yard. So I have not seen those probably 35 years. So I was, you know, really happy to see them, you know, back in Florida. Deer do like this prickly pear. You can eat the fruit, but be extremely careful. There's all kind of even invisible, what they call just lost it, stingy hairs, invisible ones that will hurt you. So you definitely have to be wearing like rubber gloves or something. Be very careful with this. I have a grandson who, when he comes down to visit, and he's 15 now, and he's still, you know, if he goes running in the yard, he's going to run into one of these. So you have to be careful with, you know, what kind of lifestyle that you have as well. So that's just my little touch on allowing weeds to be there. And, you know, all we are saying is give weeds a chance. There you go. There's that song for now. What if you have areas where it's just too tough for turf? It's just not going to grow. Maybe you have deep, 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 deep shade, or recurring fungal problems. That's very common around here. Compact soil. It wasn't maintained properly, maybe even before you. And of course, this is a big thing, the buried building materials or fill dirt that just doesn't want to cooperate and have something grow there. Or maybe there's roots, you know, from a tree. Sometimes we have to make the decision, do we want the grass or do we want the tree? And here you're competing with shade and roots and compact soil, all of these. So, and that's all going to compete for soil space, water, oxygen, nutrients, and tree trunks do extend. We used to think they mirrored the canopy. Now we know they go beyond the canopy of the tree. So sometimes fighting with those tree roots, you just can't really get grass to grow. So here, I'm just going to show you 3 low growing ground covers that could substitute for the look of a lawn, but this isn't something that is very, you know, walkable, especially barefoot or anything like that. It's just if you want that flat, low growing ground cover in that area. Dwarf Asiatic Jasmine is one of them that can, it is going to stay this dark green. It can do pretty well in some shade, and it's going to have a nice thick mat. It is very aggressive, so you probably don't want or need your lawnmower in this area, but you are going to need your weed eater to keep it, you know, where you want it to be. But I think it has a very, very nice dark green look. It says here it will require moderate irrigation. We have some here in our office. The only time ever I saw that, you know, expanse of it start to even look slightly bad was last May when we had 0 rain and nobody watered it, and now it's come back just fine. This one is a native, Sunshine Mimosa. I do know someone who uses it as a lawn. This is a picture of her lawn. And when all those, you know, the time of year for the flowering is done, she lets her husband mow it, comes back just fine. Now, this is another plant that seems to be generating a love-hate relationship. I know some master gardeners will tell me, don't ever mention this plant ever in your life, because they feel that it has become too aggressive. It all depends on what you're looking for, how much space you're looking to fill. In a small bed, after a few years, you know, maybe it will become an aggravation for you. So again, keep that in mind, that you may need a lot of space for it. This is a non-native ground cover that's becoming more and more popular. It's Perennial Peanut. It can be mowed. Once it's established, all of these ground covers, once they're established, you won't need to irrigate them. This also can be aggressive. I've had a few people kind of become aggravated with how aggressive it can be. And there's 2 different types. There's the rhizomal, which I believe is the more aggressive, that grows from the underground roots. And then there's another type that isn't quite as aggressive. So I believe, at least at one time, you could buy these at the big box store under the name EcoTurf. So, and it'll put up these yellow flowers. It is purely ornamental. It's not going to produce any kind of peanuts. And I have checked, apparently they have a bee expert at Osceola County Extension, just kind of fell into that knowledge. And she said that this will attract bees. I have not seen a large amount of pollinators on Perennial Peanut, but she says it will attract bees, but not honey producers, because that's her line of thinking, but native bees, it can attract it as well. Now this Soon as it turns a little bit cold, it's going to turn brown. So you got to think about that too. You have all winter kind of like dead lettuce looking, on your yard. So that's a consideration as well. Before we move on to Frank's portion, when he's going to cover this, but the benefits of reducing your lawn size. We have talked about replacements for lawns, letting lawns just go and let the ecosystem happen in the lawn, or maybe you're in an area, which he's going to cover, which is very particular, that you have a beautiful lawn, or they care for the lawn for you. But there are things you can do to reduce the size of that lawn, and doing so reduces water consumption. And this says, according to the EPA, 30 to 60% of urban fresh water is used to water lawns. I work for the water department here in Hernando County. I can tell you, yes, 60% of the water we deliver is put on lawns. So it's going to save time and energy when you reduce that on lawn maintenance. Reduction in the use of all these chemicals. Reduction in that air and noise pollution that I discussed earlier. A 3.5 horsepower lawnmower pollutes as much in 1 hour as a car driving 350 miles. And again, that enhanced biodiversity. The more different types of plants you have, the better ecosystem that your yard is. And you can do it in a way that attracts, increases property value, and it lets you have a very attractive yard as well. Here are some resources that you can look through that have to do with what we just talked about. And like I said, I'll be glad to send you a PDF of this, so don't try to write it all down right now. And I mentioned that a lot of my classes are on Hernando County government YouTube. And it's a pretty big list right now. So here's ones you can pick out of it to watch and follow through on what I've talked about today. Under the Florida Friendly Landscaping playlist, you can find Reduce Your Chemical Use, Pulling in the Pollinators. I did that with Frank. Weeds or wildflowers, or When Lawns Just Don't Cut It. Look those up as well if you want even more in-depth information on what I've discussed today. And again, here's my email, LillyB@hernandocounty.us. And here's my Facebook page. And find me on Hernando County government. You got to put the word government in there, YouTube. So let me stop sharing so that Frank can start sharing and go on with his part.
All right, thank you much.
Mm-hmm.
Get my screen pulled up here. Make sure we get the right one. All right. So hopefully you are seeing the correct screen there. Does that look good?
I'm not seeing anything. Other people might be.
Okay.
Let me see. I just have Frank Galdo has started screen sharing. That's all I have.
Okay, well, maybe somebody could toss it in the chat real quick if
Yeah,
you're
let us
seeing
know.
a Florida Friendly Yard sign tucked down in some blue-eyed grass.
Black screen, according to Heather.
Black screen. That's not what I'm trying to do. All right. You know, you would think I've done this enough that I would get the whole thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we
on the
all
first
have.
try. All right, let's try just telling it screen 2 instead.
There it is. Yep, you got it.
Okay.
Yeah,
That was
your
odd.
blue eye is prettier than mine was.
All right.
Your photograph is, yes.
Okay, so hopefully that does everything the right way and we got all those kinks ironed out there. So yeah, I want to first say thanks for like jumping in with a lot of really excellent points there that kind of set the stage really well for how to approach this if you're living in an HOA community or in somewhere where you've got to put a little bit extra intent into it. So yeah, a lot of the stuff you were talking about with, you know, figuring out what your purpose is, what your users are, and all those things are going to play right into this discussion as well. As I'm kicking off, if anybody wants to toss in the chat whether or not they live in an HOA community, that would be something I'm just kind of curious to see, you know, how many of you guys actually have that sort of consideration to work with. And then, yeah, I'm going to kind of jump right into it, talking about some of the rules, the rights, and how to avoid fights and things like that. In these pictures, you can actually see a little bit of what Lilly was just mentioning, with some of the potential caveats with something like Perennial Peanut. So on the left, you can actually see what it looks like in the winter when it freezes back. You know, a lot of times when we go looking for pictures of this stuff, we see it when it's at its best, kind of like up in the top right corner there. And so it's useful to know from folks who have tried this stuff, try to gather that experience. Like, what does this look like, not only at its best, but at its worst in the wintertime? Or, you know, what's the weed pressure like in something like this? Know what you're getting into. And that way, when you're kind of factoring in what's the intended purpose, what's your foot traffic level, you know, is this having to deal with septic or anything like that, you can kind of have all the full picture before getting into it. So we're going to get right into a couple of things. I want to talk a little bit about tips for success and a little bit less stress, which Lilly already kicked off some pretty good talking points on. I'll get a little bit deeper into some of that, and then talk a little bit about FFL law, the rules, local codes and ordinances, and how all of this can kind of work or not work in various situations. Now, quick disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. This is not substitute for legal counsel. So, you know, don't take this and try to, you know, argue your case in court with it. But it's a good little crash course in some of the considerations. All right. So in an HOA setting, you know, sometimes your best strategy is actually going to be, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So in other words, if the turf is reasonably healthy and it's well matched to the site conditions, you know, like Lilly mentioned, believe it or not, turf, when it's the right plant for the right place, doesn't require a ton of water, fertilizer, or pesticides. It's not the inherent beast that a lot of us think of it as. A lot of that's the cause of mismanagement and attempting to grow it where it doesn't want to grow. So ideally, if you've got it growing in a spot where it's right plant, right place, you keep it mowed at the correct height, you avoid having any kind of wide open bare patches where stuff can really start to take hold in terms of aggressive weed colonization and stuff. You know, keep the edges neat, keep the beds weeded, and, you know, focus in a case like this potentially more on the diversity in your surrounding areas. You know, look at your landscape beds. Can you create a lot of diversity there? Can you potentially expand some of them into areas where the turf maybe isn't looking so great? And, you know, keeping stuff looking good and well-defined like that is probably one of your biggest tools in working within an HOA managed community kind of setting, because that sort of thing can go a long way in helping you sell any ideas that you've got of, you know, I'd like to diversify a little bit. I'd like to increase your beds. If it's already looking good, it helps sell your case. If you've got things that you want to use that do get a little bit unruly from time to time, or you know they don't necessarily look good year round. Lilly and I have talked a little bit about the concept of backyard plants versus front yard plants and things like that. So that can also be helpful to kind of have that concept of you know, where you can let things go a little more wild. So with that approach, you know, even in a pretty small yard with a sizable chunk of turf in the front yard, I did a quick count before this program, and I've got well over 60 species in my little suburban HOA landscape. And it doesn't look crazy. It doesn't look too wild and untamed. And, you know, like Lilly mentioned, if you're driving by at 30 miles an hour, you don't really notice that there's not necessarily pristine lawn out there. There's some weeds poking up here and there. But yeah, the diversity that you can include elsewhere kind of, you know, take into account some of that, and take into account that some of that kind of diversity can actually help you to manage the areas of turf that you still have with less inputs. So for instance, all these different pollinator plants that I have flowering through the year attract not only all sorts of pollinators, but a lot of beneficial insects that help to control pests in the landscape. So, you know, things like grubs, mole crickets, aphids, armyworms, other common pests actually are better controlled when you have a diverse variety of shrubs and flowers and things like that. It doesn't necessarily all have to be in the turf to provide that diversity and benefit. So surrounding those turf areas with diversity and making those turf areas right plant, right place, and minimal inputs as possible can sometimes achieve some of the goals you're looking for. So kind of think of it that way a little bit. Now, maybe you've got some lawn areas that really aren't looking so great. This is an example of an area that when I moved in was looking pretty sparse. It had been scalped repeatedly. The sprinklers have been broken and neglected in this area. And, you know, I kind of took the approach of understanding how closely is anybody going to look, you know, based on what I can see in my own neighborhood. How much time do I have to work with this kind of area? And, you know, what kind of goals can I achieve here? And so, you know, one option is what I've done in this area. Essentially take that approach of, if it grows and it's green and it can be mowed and I can keep this from being a bare area, you know, let's just work with what we've got, see what comes back, plug in the bare spots. This literally is a mixture in this photo of recovering St. Augustine, pusley, sedges, doveweed. There's actually even culinary thyme mixed in there that I just plopped into a little bare spot right in the middle. So you can get creative with it, and, you know, potentially, depending how closely anybody's looking, if you get the right match of green colors and a good even height, and you mow it, keep it looking, you know, pretty decent. You know, the fact that you're making an active effort and the fact that it doesn't look wild and woolly can sometimes be enough. Now, that approach might not always work. It's going to depend on your particular neighborhood vibe and things like that. Let's say the turf is really just the wrong plant for the area, and there just aren't attractive weeds stepping up to fill in the turf. No matter what you try to do, just isn't cutting it. You know, that's the area where you might be thinking, all right, I want to try a ground cover, or make the case that a landscape bed could have better curb appeal or whatnot. Now, if you're trying to do that, you know, kind of think through what your goals are and what the neighborhood aesthetics are. You know, if you're hoping that it's going to have some wildlife benefits and things like that, keep in mind that might not be the main goals of your neighbors or the HOA board. So while wildlife benefits of things like the turkey tango fogfruit and the twin flower might be something that's on your mind, if the selling points for the neighborhood are going to be, this is going to be green, this is going to be better looking than the turf that I've got now that will not grow in this spot, and, you know, this might actually reduce some of the fertilizer runoff that's going into our ponds and things like that. Just consider your audience and consider your talking points wisely. And that can sometimes help to steer the conversation for or against your case. So think about which points are going to resonate. You know, just like a ground cover, it may be easier to make the case that a well-maintained landscape bed is honestly going to have better curb appeal and resilience and all that than what you've got currently going on now. It may have wildlife benefits too, and, you know, water savings and things like that. But but, think through how you're going to pitch it. Just compare it to what you've got now, what you've already tried, and show how these are more the right plant for the right place. One tip I would definitely have is, plan to start small, especially if you're doing a do-it-yourself. Take your time, plan out your plants. Don't just go for kind of a wildflower mix. Generally, those wildflower seed mix, it's going to look like as much chaos as you can imagine. It's not going to look planned. It's not going to be easy to maintain. It's not even going to be easy to tell what's a weed and what's not. So start small, start with a few plants that you know how to recognize and you'll be able to manage and maintain. And manage the weeds proactively. Deal with the site, clear it, prepare for the fact that those weeds are going to spring up. Like Lilly was mentioning about that area by the swale. That area got cleared recently. She didn't plant anything and it is already completely covered in green. You don't want that if you're trying to create a managed area. So anticipate the weeds, prep the spot, start small, manage the weeds real actively, and then, be ready to put water where it's needed. Do a little bit of weeding to get things started off, and don't overplant because, things are going to spread a little bit. So here's an example. I've actually been helping my sister make this area in a corner of her yard where, the grass really just wasn't all that hot when she moved in. We've kind of carved out this corner as a starting point. This is that same little 1 gallon Dune sunflower from that picture. A few months later, it has covered an area probably about 6 feet across. And this is a really good example that diversity of wildlife benefits doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have, a botanical garden, a sample of every plant that could possibly grow in Florida. This one Dune sunflower plant, in just a few minutes of looking, I was seeing, multiple different species of native bees, wasps, little cool caterpillars and things like that. Even just a small area like this can make a difference, and it can look good and sell the concept. She's actually had, since putting in this area, multiple people literally stop and talk to her just about this patch, and you see it from down the road. It looks good, and that can support future efforts if you want to come in and go bigger. So by going manageable at first, you're going to be able to maintain it and show, this can look good, this can be well maintained, it's not going to look weedy, it's not going to look wild. And really, really importantly, the next part that I want to dive into is that if you live in a deed restricted community, you cannot just go tearing out your turf and doing this in most cases. And you might be saying, but I heard there's an FFL law. And there is, and this question comes up a lot. People will quote a part of the FFL law that says HOA rules can't prohibit or be enforced so as to prohibit any property owner from implementing Florida-friendly landscaping as defined in Florida statutes. And the thing is, this gets misinterpreted a lot. They can't outright prohibit it, but before you go tearing out all the turf and everything, they're typically going to still want you to go through the approval process, and that is fully allowed within the FFL law. They can still ask you to go through approval to make sure that it meets the general aesthetics of the neighborhood and all the different kind of rules and things like that. And they can still have design and upkeep standards. This not only applies in an HOA, but also in within your community, with your codes and ordinances. There can be requirements for design and upkeep and things like that. And it's going to probably differ from community to community. So just because something worked in one spot does not necessarily mean you can do it the same exact way in another. So I wrote a blog post recently all about this, kind of get into the nitty gritty. I know Lilly's done some programs. I think I mentioned it on the next slide there, And yeah, there's a lot of good information kind of getting into the nitty gritty of this, but essentially, you can be fully required to meet certain aesthetic guidelines for design and maintenance for whatever you're proposing as replacement. You still can need to go through whatever is laid out in the deed restrictions in terms of getting the okay before you get started. And if you planted something like perennial peanut and it goes bare and dormant in the winter, there might be rules that come into play about that. Or if you've planted something that grows big, tall, flowering stalks, and you want to leave the stalks for birds and wildlife, that may or may not be okay. You may actually have to maintain them in certain ways if it's visible from the front yard and things like that. Leave the seed stalks in the backyard, chop them off, throw them in the brush pile, do whatever, but there may be restrictions. Likewise, if you've got your mulch just sort of flowing down the sidewalk and down the storm drains, that can cause problems, both friction with neighbors and potentially various actions. Now, here's the screenshot from Lilly's program. She actually goes into a lot of this in detail. So like she was mentioning, you got stuff on Hernando County YouTube channel that you can check out. There's also some great recorded programs from Dr. Gail Hansen up at UF that are available online. I'll try to get some links like this out there that talk about ways to get this accepted within various types of community aesthetic settings. Things like using organized complexity, repetition of form, some contrasting forms, so it's not just sort of a uniform mass of vegetation. And she talks in some of these about the importance of pathways becoming absolutely critical for this sort of thing, not only for dealing with the foot traffic issue, but also it's a key element of the design that shows some of this sort of thing is intentional. So, definitely some things not to overlook, and dive into some more depth in the concepts of. I put this photo in just to sort of highlight that this is an example of how this stuff can come into play. This is actually in the demonstration garden over in the Hillsborough County Extension Office. You can see how some of those elements of contrasting forms and the pathways and things like that just help to give a little bit of order to the chaos and keep it from looking too wild and untamed. For even more inspiration on that kind of idea, I would definitely encourage you guys to check out the designs of a famous landscape architect named Pete Udolph. And I hope I'm not butchering his name. He does some amazing sort of work with these naturalistic style landscapes that are actually incredibly well thought out and designed and planned, but come together looking just almost like they grew that way naturally. He's the designer behind the famous New York High Line and a number of other beautiful landscapes around the world that highlight seasons and native plants and things like that. This stuff is not what you get if you scatter a bag of wildflower seed mix. You will not get something like this. And there's no way, shape, or form that this is a result that you would attempt to get by just letting things kind of go wild and do what will come. So check him out. He's got some really good ideas, but also kind of shows the intentionality that goes into something like this, no matter how natural it looks. When you're thinking through plants for this kind of changing out, if you're trying to plan out a landscape, think of the form, think of the outlines, the textures, all that kind of stuff. And think of it almost in these outline kind of ways, and it can sort of help you visualize a little bit of that. If you're not necessarily thinking through your plants in that sort of abstract way, it can sometimes be helpful. Definitely more helpful than looking at something like this. And I will say, it's one of the issues with working with HOA boards and things like that is sometimes they may want you to submit a drawing. And if it's boiled down to something like this, and it gets handed over with a bunch of random plant names, a bunch of them in Latin, I'm going to be perfectly honest, I can't even envision how this is going to look as a finished landscape. And, you know, it's my profession. So if you're trying to sell the idea to an HOA, you know, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's really true in a situation like working with an HOA board, especially if you're talking about plants that aren't necessarily the standard croton and podocarpus and things that everybody's familiar with. So if you want to step outside the box of knockout roses and crotons, go ahead and kind of like augment what you're talking about with a little bit of picture, a little bit of something to help show that you've got some ideas that are going to look good, and you know, show a little bit of what you're thinking of. It really can help sell the idea. It can also potentially be helpful because then when somebody's looking at that newly installed landscape full of tiny little 1-gallon plants, and they're wondering what they just approved, and like if you've done a bait and switch or something, you've got a reassuring sort of frame of reference for, no, it's going to look like this. They need time to grow. So, of course, there are a lot of good references and resources available online. I'm going to augment the links that Lilly's got with a few more that I definitely think can help you in this kind of thing, especially if you're working with your community. There's all sorts of wonderful strategy resources out there from UF addressing exactly this sort of stuff. And then, you know, with that, I will kind of jump right into chat. I know we're running a little bit long, and I just wanted to show, as I've got my contact info up here, a couple of really wonderful low growing plants that that really do fit well in that diverse lawnscape kind of setting. You've got the fleabane and the blue-eyed grass there on the left. The one in the middle, I would love to see being used more. This is a type of native lobelia. It's actually another Florida endemic, like the green eyes Lilly mentioned earlier. And this one is so underutilized, there's not even a page for it on the Florida Native Plant Society's plant selection guide yet, which I can't even understand, because when you come across it growing naturally in mass like this, this is a roadside swale here, not too far from my office. It is absolutely stunning when it bursts into bloom. And then, you know, the rest of the year, it's just pretty much a mowed swale. It only flowers at about that tall, you know, similar to the frogfruit kind of idea. So, yeah, I hope I touched on some good tips and concepts. It was sort of a presentation. I was all over the map as I was pulling together different resources and ideas, and I tried to make it cohesive, and hopefully it gave you some thoughts to work with.
Well, I think you did a great job, Frank, and there's a reason that I invite you and others like you, you know, to teach these classes, because I sit here and assimilate everything that you're saying. So then I become a composite of everybody else I've ever listened to when I am trying to teach myself. And I appreciate your willingness to come and teach all of us today. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, but all the live people, please stay here if you have any questions for me or Frank. Thank you very much, everybody. Don't leave, live people, but thank you for your viewers, and have a great day.